Welcome, welcome, welcome. Janet will do an official intro, but if you haven't yet introduced yourselves, please can you share with us your name, your location, and why you've joined us here today. So over to you, Janet.
This is an exciting time for us. This is the first time we've gotten our most valuable supporters, both our volunteers and our donors, together to kind of review our progress and have you all tell us where you think we should be heading next. Just for those of you who are really brand new, we've existed as Climate Action California for about a year and a half. We started with a 501c4 so that we could endorse a few candidates in the midterm elections. And a few months after that, we realized we needed a 501c3 because a lot of what we do is education, and frankly, we need to raise some money. And we've had the 501c3 since about last June. It's kind of challenging keeping them separate. We want to be sure that our 501c3 nonprofit status and that of our partners isn't contaminated with too much lobbying or electoral work. So you're going to be hearing later on from our elections team, which is strictly part of the 501c4. It's been a wonderful working with this great group of people. And one of the really kind of surprising things that has kind of dawned on us is that Climate Action California is really substantially different from most of the other climate groups, and certainly the large environmental groups in California. The normal MO for those groups is to recruit supporters so that they can raise money, so they can pay staff to do the work. And we do just kind of the opposite thing. We recruit volunteers to do the work and raise money to pay staff to support those volunteers. Because in a large sense, our goal isn't only to defeat climate change, but it is to give everyone something good to do and a community to do it with as we all, work toward this challenging future. And there are lots of ways to participate. You can volunteer a lot. You can volunteer a little. You can give money. And it's really been a tremendously rewarding group to be working with. Very non-hierarchical. I call myself the CEO because it makes us sound more important, but I'm really kind of the ringmaster, trying to make sure that everybody is doing what they do best and having a good time doing it. So this is a big moment for us to be having our donors and our volunteers together. I wish that there was a better opportunity. I'd love to take an hour and just have everybody talk to each other about why they're here and what they want to do on the climate. And maybe we'll do that at some other time. But we do need to get to our program and tell you all about all the things that we're working on. So if you have a minute to put a few words in the chat about where you're coming from and why you're glad you're here, that would be helpful. But I just want to turn it over to Catherine and the rest of our program.
Thanks, Janet. So I guess just before we actually introduce our speakers, a couple of housekeeping items first. So first of all, you would have noticed that this call is being recorded, and we'll circulate a copy of a link to the recording after the call. We'll also be sharing with you the chat, contents of the chat, and also we'll be mentioning a few resources, a few links to our website. So we've consolidated everything in a single toolkit, and I've dropped into that toolkit in the chat. So we'll be sharing that after the call as well. Okay. So with you today, we have a variety of speakers. Janet, heard from. We'll have a welcome from our chair of the Climate Action California Foundation Board, Anushka Tamani. We have an update from Adam Sweeney, who's the head of our elections team. We will then have an update on a very, very important petition, which is one of our major projects this year, from Will Brieger. And then we'll have a panel, which will be moderated by Jan Zieler, with Wayne, Jonathan, Steve, and myself. And we'll also hear from our donors, including Dennis, and also Adam will do the closing. So this is the outline of our session for today. As I said, we'll start with a welcome. Throughout the presentation, we'll be sharing a few highlights about our impact in terms of stats and figures and rich stories about our achievements in 2023. We will have updates from some of our team leaders. As I said, there'll be a panel discussion, and then at the end we'll have a Q&A, because we'd really like to see what questions you have for us. Okay. If you have any burning questions as we go along, then please drop them in the chat. We'll address them at the end. All right, and now I'll hand over to Anushka. Thank you.
Hi, Catherine. Yeah, let me just climb on the soapbox for a second. Hi, everyone. Thank you guys so much for coming to our special briefing and for everything that we've been able to do over the last year and a half. Your contributions as donors and as volunteers have let us do so much more than I could have imagined when we started back in June, or back in, I guess, maybe I forget the exact month, but it's been so incredible. I think Janet mentioned we're meeting today as CAC RC4, but I would like to thank both backers of CAC and the CAC Foundation for letting us expand our legislative and our campaign work. Climate Action California strength has and always will be our grassroots mobility. As a youth volunteer, there is truly no place else that gives me the opportunity to completely immerse myself in climate policy and focus on creating substantive change. And learning so many incredible things from all of the wonderful volunteers that work with us. The ability for volunteers to join and then be completely unencumbered by internal barriers gives us that ability to effectively respond and make the most progress we can. We have a very special scientific and analytical approach that comes pretty much entirely from the expertise and diverse perspectives and enthusiasm of our volunteers. And donor support has let us build our platform and connect people together, hire staff to actually, make things happen. And the reason we've been successful is listening to our volunteers and our backers. Our volunteers and our members are an integral part of this organization, and that's reflected in our bylaws and in the way we make things, and in the way we work. And that's what we're here to do today. I absolutely cannot wait to hear what you guys have to say, both about what we've been able to accomplish over the last year and our very exciting plans. We've gathered here so that we can share ideas and assemble a real force for the future. And I cannot wait to see that future happen with all of your dedication and support. Thank you guys so much again.
Thank you, Anushka. Thanks for that. All right, so this is our first slide on impact. And this is a quote from Congressman Jared Huffman, who we met in November last year. As you can see on the slide, he told us, "I appreciate everything you do. Keep all those irons in the fire, and keep pushing at all levels." And this was in the context of a very distinct possibility that we may not see meaningful climate legislation at the federal level, certainly not this year, but maybe for a very long time. And he was trying to emphasize the importance of passing climate legislation in California to set the tone for the rest of the country. Last year, we attended 15 meetings with legislators. Here are happy, smiling faces with meetings with Assemblymember Pellerin, Congressman Huffman, Senator Schiavo. These meetings are always well received by legislators, and it's uncommon for them to say, Goodness, there's so many of you here today. They're always surprised when they turn out in force. And we need to continuing turning out en masse and making it very clear that climate legislation is important to us. And we really see that engagement working really effectively for us. We now have almost 13,000 supporters, both in state and out of state. We have about 100 really active members that have participated in one of our, well, across sometimes several of our teams. As you can see, we have teams focused on building decarbonization, energy policy, plastics, climate finance, offshore wind, refrigerants, so really, really highly technical areas. And these teams work tirelessly behind the scenes to study and make sense of proposed legislation, write letters of support and opposition. Today was a particularly active day. We sent a lot of letters to Sacramento. And if you're interested in signing up, then the link is in the toolkit that I shared earlier in the chat. Okay, slightly odd saying hello to myself, but I will do that. This year, we also hired 2 members of staff. So I joined Climate Action California as volunteer coordinator. So it's my job to onboard our lovely volunteers and to provide support and make sure that their experience with us is enjoyable. And we also have Alex Matthews, who joined us as head of comms. Alex, I know you're here somewhere. Say hello.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Alex. Alex also edits our excellent Substack, which I'll talk about later today. So that's us. All right. And in addition to our legislative work, we also run very well attended training sessions twice a year in June and in December. Recordings of those are available on our website as well as on YouTube. And as Janet said earlier, we do see this as a really, really important part of our mission to demystify what happens in Sacramento and to enable our volunteers to be effective, better advocates. Okay, so that's all for now on impact. I'll hand over to Adam for an update on our elections work. And Adam, feel free to introduce yourself first after this quote.
All right. Well, let me start with this little quote from Nick Schultz, one of our candidates down in Southern California, saying, "Thank you so much for sharing the amazing news." This is when we told him we were endorsing him. "We're so excited about this endorsement. Please convey our appreciation to everyone involved with CAC." What this tells you is we were endorsing people and they noticed, like they cared, and that's really cool. But first, let me just tell you a little bit about who I am. My name's Adam Sweeney. I'm from San Jose. I used to be a Silicon Valley techie for 30 years, doing the build companies thing. But I retired 2 years ago to try to get behind the effort on fighting climate change. I realized I'd kind of had my head in the sand for the last 30 years. Assuming that, like all of you who are paying more attention, had this covered and we're solving the whole climate crisis for us. But I realized, it's kind of a big problem that we've made a lot of progress on, but maybe it was time for me to help. So I started in policy. I'm an old engineer, right? Like, okay, policy, I can kind of wrap my head around that, and started to learn a lot of great stuff. One of the things I learned is, wow, even here in California, with our super majority of Democratic legislators and our Democratic governor, it can be really hard to pass important climate legislation. Like, what's going on? And this is when I had my big aha, brilliant moment about politics, realizing it's so much easier to pass the climate legislation that you need if the people in office already agree with you. I know, brilliant insight. Why did it take me a year or two to figure it out? I don't know, but it did. More sophisticated people have told me this more pithily as like, politics drive policy. And that's just the way it is, unfortunately. And if we want to be effective, it's important for us to join the game. So let's see, next slide, I think. Yes. So late last year, Janet came to us and said, hey, you all, who wants to start endorsing candidates in California? And the idea was to do it a little differently than other groups out there, because as I'm sure you all know, there are very great environmental groups out there already endorsing candidates, but we wanted to do it with a focus strictly on climate. Yeah, and that's a little different from what are mostly broader environmental groups who care about many, many important things. But we wanted to focus just on climate. So I signed up. I was like, yes, I'm getting in there. 7 of us actually signed up for this. I think it was 7. And we set out to make this happen. We decided very early on to focus just on our state legislative races. The congressional races are so tempting, but they're also so big and there's so many more of them. And we're a little first time team and we had to start somewhere. So we decided to focus so that we could try to actually learn how to get good at this by really accomplishing something instead of spreading ourselves too thin. We also decided to focus on climate champions, like people who are going to be future climate leaders in the Senate and the Assembly. You know, who's the next Josh Becker, right? Because we're going to need one, because Josh is going to term out eventually. That can be a little different, and it's an important choice because sometimes there are other ways you can go. You can just endorse in every race, just endorse the better candidate, right? There are a lot of choices, but this also had the benefit of limiting the number of people that we would endorse. And since we're a small team, this is our first time, that's a good thing. So as you can see here, we sent out lots of questionnaires, 150 of them. Turns out it's really hard to figure out who the heck is actually running for office. You'd think it would all be there on the Secretary of State's website, but no, like not until it's far too late. So we went digging through campaign sites, registrar sites, candidate Facebook pages, and Instagram pages. We harassed some of their consultants to figure out how to reach them. In the end, we were able to get contact info, at least for 150 of them, and 67 of them actually responded. I think that's a really good response rate because we were clear that we were looking for climate champions, and a lot of these candidates know that they are not climate champions and so did not take the time to respond to us. We got a wide range of responses. You know, we had people like Tara Srikrishnan here in Santa Clara, who's like a super awesome climate leader candidate. And we had others who were really not so much climate leaders, mostly well-intentioned, but not so much. In the end, we endorsed 28 candidates. We had incumbents like Josh Becker and Lena Gonzalez. We had newbies like Tara Srikrishnan and Nick Schultz that we saw the quote from, a wide spectrum of them. And we told them, hey, we love you. We're endorsing you. We're putting you on our website and sending that with all of our people. They could put it on their websites, which is one of the things they do find valuable. They like to have lots of endorsements, especially from like climate and environmental groups here in California. There aren't that many that do this. But then, of course, we reached the part of, well, okay, we figured out who to endorse, but how do we help them win? Like, that's actually the most important part of this whole effort. And so we recruited more of you to come help. We bulked up our team to maybe 15, 20 people total, and we split up the candidates into Northern California and Southern California teams, and we went after them. We sent press releases out. We did social media posts. Janet and I actually did a radio interview on KPFA in Berkeley, the most liberal radio station in the universe. We did letters to the editors, all kinds of good stuff. Some of us even sent the candidates money, which I'm sure they appreciated. In the end, 23 of them made it through to the next round, and we're going to see them in November. And the rest of this year is going to be all about making sure that they win. All right, next slide. So how do we do that? How do we get them to win? One of the things we've realized in our discussions about this is we think, you know, many of us and our friends, the climate people here in California, we're always trying to figure out what's the biggest thing I can do myself to have an impact on the climate. And this year, it's very clear. My biggest climate action is my vote. making sure that I vote into office people who are actually going to lead for change and drive forward in fighting the climate crisis for us. And that's the message we want to get out to all of you, to our much larger mailing list population and beyond. Get people to vote and think about climate as the thing they're doing. Think about their voting as the thing they're doing for climate this year, because this is bigger than your EV. It's bigger than going vegan, right? Trump gets in office, we're toast, right? That's at the federal level on climate policy. We're going to be hiding here in California defending ourselves. But the same thing happens in the Senate. If we want the good things to get done, we have to elect the right people. So we're going to do a lot of outreach. We're going to do some really interesting social media creator marketing with these very young people from a little company called Social Current. And yes, it looks like one of them spent a semester in France in the way they spelled Courant. These people get social media creators to talk about your issue to the people who follow them. They've done some good stuff in other political campaigns, and it should be pretty interesting to engage them. We also want to just reach out to all the environmental voters out there in California through Instagram ads for our endorsees. You know, you can target in their districts the kind of voters that you're looking for, and that's one of the things we're hoping to do. And finally, we're hoping that we have the bandwidth and the money to expand our efforts to the California congressional races. California is a battleground state for flipping the federal House from red to blue this year. There's a lot of important races. You can see them on our website, which there's a little link to there at the bottom. It's climateactioncaelections.org. And if we can, we'd love to try and help them win too. So finally, we really hope that we can work with all of you and all of our other Climate Action California volunteers and all of your friends to help our endorsees win, because getting these people into office is a very big deal and will make all of our policy work in the coming years a whole lot easier. All right, I think that's it for me. I'm going to hand it off to Will Brieger to talk about some of the great stuff that he's doing. Thank you very much.
Good evening. I should start by clarifying that Dan Chandler is actually the head of the agricultural methane team, and he is our subject matter expert. I am a retired environmental attorney with some experience on air pollution and climate change in particular when I was working. So CAC has been a great fit for me. Our next slide, please. So, as most of you know, methane is a significant driver of climate change, and it's one of the areas that is most ripe for regulating. Agricultural methane is the largest source in California, and it is completely unregulated. So I just want to underscore that reducing methane emissions is the single most effective tool as identified by the UN Environment Program. It's the single most effective tool we've got to combat climate change. Unlike if we could completely stop carbon dioxide emissions, the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere will still linger for hundreds of years. If we can eliminate methane emissions, we see improvements within a decade. It's very fast acting, and thus it's timely this decade for us to do everything we can. So what the agricultural methane team has put together is a petition to the Air Resources Board asking them to regulate agricultural methane, which really comes down to feedlots and dairies. Next slide, please. So CARB is pretty experienced at regulating. They've already got in place regulations to reduce methane from the oil and gas sector, facilities, pipelines, refineries, as well as landfills. But next slide, please. Livestock is actually a much bigger source and has gotten a complete pass for a number of reasons. It's a little more difficult, it's not straightforward to figure out how to control those emissions, although it can be done. and the politics are different. So we are taking advantage of a legal provision that says citizens can petition an agency to initiate a rulemaking. And then the agency is obligated to consider that petition and respond with a yes or a no. So we submitted a 26-page regulation with all kinds of factual support, suggesting that this was not only an important thing to do, but there are many ways to do it. The next slide, please. So it turns out that California dairies and feedlots are unusually high polluting because of a practice of collecting manure in lagoons. And the manure is half of the problem with methane from livestock. The other half is from the livestock themselves. They burp and fart methane. And there are solutions for that too. But just changing manure handling practices could put California in a much better place. So next slide, please.
I think that's all the slides.
Oh, that's it. Okay, so
yeah.
So our petition includes a number of solutions that have been tried and experimented with in other parts of the world, in academic research here in California. And so we think we have armed the board with enough information that they can go forward if they can see a way to do it. At a minimum, they should be collecting information and requiring livestock facilities to measure and report their emissions, which is a typical first step for a regulatory effort. So we're hoping that the board will respond with something that's the more the merrier, as we argue in our petition. And we expect and actually are entitled to a response by the end of May. So we're looking forward to hearing what comes next.
Thank you, Will. And what, if anything, what is it that you need from our volunteers, either now or later on in the process? Now's the time to make your pitch. Yes.
So if a rulemaking process begins, it's a very public process, and the CARB, the Air Board, takes public comments at every step of the way. So we can circulate the information for the opportunities to do that. If they say, no, we're not going to initiate a rulemaking process, I think the next step would be to go to the legislature or the governor, who can control to a certain degree what CARB does. So that's a whole next campaign, but this is certainly the shortest route to regulation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This was such an interesting and new topic for me, and I'm sure for many others. So thank you very much for leading on this very important issue. Okay. So carrying on with the theme of impact, our coalition continues to grow. So we continue to work with our partners and other climate advocacy organizations. We have active collaborations with Climate Reality Project, 350 Sacramento, many others. And we very often author letters and petitions and get our partners to sign on or sign on to their petitions. And that allows us to have even more impact and be heard and seen in Sacramento. Okay, so now I would like to invite Dennis Levitt to share his thoughts and experiences of being a CIC donor. Over to you, Dennis.
Thank you, Catherine. I wish I had the kind of knowledge that the people that spoke already have about climate change, but I don't. They are really knowledgeable. They not just care about climate change, but they're very aware of what we're going to be doing about it. To me, in California, we have a really unique opportunity. The National Congress is mired in dysfunction, but in California, we have some real climate champions, as Adam pointed out, in our state legislature. People that not only recognize the problem, but they're interested in actually meaningful solutions, not just fig leaves or things that will show up good on a campaign flyer or things that will sound good in a debate. They actually seem to care about the problem. In the past several years, they've been able to pass quite a bit of meaningful legislation here in California, but if anything, it's pointed out how much more there is to do, and there is a lot to do. California's strength comes not just from what's in the legislature, but from the size of our economy. If we were a separate country, California would be the 5th or 6th largest economy in the world. We would be sitting at the table of the G7. But of course, we're part of the United States. And here in the United States, we are 1/7 of the gross domestic product. 1 out of every $7 passes through California. And with that kind of size and that kind of market, manufacturers simply cannot ignore us. Whether they make automobiles, refrigerators, or anything else, they can't afford to ignore California. And that puts us in a really, really unique position. So the question is, how do we capitalize on this market size, even with a very blue, state legislature? And that's where Climate Action California comes in. You won't find a more dedicated, knowledgeable, or hardworking group of people dedicated to moving the needle and actually making some really meaningful things happen to stop greenhouse gas emissions. When I first started to notice CAC, I must say I was completely blown away by how much they know and understand about climate legislation in California, how much they accomplish, and honestly, how little I knew and how little I had accomplished. But here we are. So in my first week as a volunteer, I was in a Zoom with State Assembly Member Pilar Schiavo. I was in another Zoom with Assembly Member Al Muratsuchi. It showed me these people were really serious. They were talking to decision makers. They weren't just having coffee together and talking about what might or might not happen. They were actually writing letters, creating legislation, working with state legislatures to make things happen. They're fluent in what is happening in Sacramento. And there's a large group of dedicated volunteers working very hard to make a difference. Some of us donate to a range of organizations on a range of issues. Personally, I really try to donate where my dollars are going to have the most impact. The Sierra Club, for example, does a lot of really good things. And last year, they brought in $120 million. The NRDC brought in almost $200 million. Honestly, my donation would be like adding to the grains of sand on a beach. If you're concerned about the effects of climate change and you really want to get a lot of bang for your buck and really see some meaningful things to move the needle on climate change, Climate Action California is a really good place to start with your charitable giving. And I'm really happy that I've done that. And I'm done.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dennis. And thank you for all your support over the years. All right, so now we head over to our panel, which Joan will moderate for us. Joan, tell us a little about yourself and why you are with Climate Action California.
Well, hi, I'm Joan Zieler, and I'm on the communications team and the elections team. And I feel very lucky to have found Climate Action California. Another group I was working with wanted to do a legislative training with Janet, and I volunteered to pull a few video clips for her and started working with Climate Action California. I learned so much and I had so much fun that I'm still here. So there you go. And today on our panel, we have Jonathan, Wayne, Catherine, and Steve. And we're going to start out with Jonathan on the transportation team. Jonathan, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
My name's Jonathan Cole, and I am on the transportation team. I'm actually pinch hitting right now for Judy Bortz, who's the lead of the transportation team, but couldn't be here this evening. And while Judy has been with the organization from the beginning, I'm a relative newbie. I've only been active for about 2 months in the organization. And both Joan and Catherine mentioned the legislative training. That was what pulled me in as well. I attended one of the legislative trainings and decided that that was where I wanted to put my time. I taught physics for 36 years at Mira Costa College in Oceanside, California. And I became more and more interested during that time in climate science. I took graduate courses in climate science. I did research with Virabhadran Ramanathan, who's a researcher at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. Ended up co-writing a couple of chapters with him on a textbook on climate change, and developed my own climate change course at the college. And after I retired, I was looking for some place to put that climate interest. And especially during the legislative training, I realized this is really where the rubber meets the road. This is really where all the climate science is telling us that we need to take action, and we need to take action urgently. And it's through legislation, and especially in California, which is a climate leader, that we're able to really affect change. So that's a little bit about my background.
That's great. I didn't realize that about the legislator training with you. That's terrific. Well, so probably the biggest transportation-related legislation last year was the truck rule. Can you tell us more about what it does, and does it go far enough?
This is, and again, Will was talking about California Air Resources Board in conjunction with livestock methane. This was a regulation that they passed last April, and that's the accumulation of a multi-year effort by a lot of folks, including Judy, the head of our transportation team, to basically, we know that we've already, Governor Newsom has already mandated that after 2035, no light-duty vehicles, internal combustion vehicles, will be sold in California. This is looking at trucks. And so the rule that they passed in 2023 gradually between now and 2042 phases out the use of diesel engine, internal combustion, fossil fuel, carbon dioxide emitting trucks. And it's going to start in it's starting this year. As of this year, they first focus on the fleets of trucks that take supplies from the ports to distribution centers. And no new internal combustion engine trucks can be purchased for those fleets as of this year. And that the one reason to start there is that that has an environmental justice aspect, because it addresses communities like Long Beach, for example, that are really suffering from the pollution from all of the industry around there, including emissions from trucks going from the port. And then by 2036, there will be basically no new no new non-zero emission vehicles purchased for any of the fleets that are covered. And by 2042, all of the internal combustion engine trucks should be retired. And so it would be a complete transition to zero electric vehicles, that is, to electric trucks. And you asked, does it go far enough? One of the big disappointments was that the hope was that this would cover all fleets of 5 vehicles or more, but it was watered down to 50 vehicles or more. But that still addresses a very significant portion of the internal combustion trucks, diesel trucks in California. So hopefully that will push manufacturers to really expand production of electric vehicles, and chances are the smaller fleets will move along as well.
And that timeline, do you think that that's fast enough?
That's with any climate change, we should have started 20 years ago. We should have, we should now be completing that transition. But there's always pushback. There was definitely pushback from the trucking industry. There's still a couple of lawsuits out there. There's actually a piece of legislation out this year, which probably isn't going anywhere, to allow local governments to postpone by a further 10 years. So in the kind of back and forth of legislation, this is what reached through compromise. It's not what we'd ideally like. We'd like to cover more trucks faster, but this is what was politically achievable, and it's still a significant step forward.
Right. So I guess we should move on to Wayne. Thank you very much, Jonathan. Wayne, could you introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, John. My name is Wayne Morgan. And I'm a retired electrical engineer and I live in Ventura, California. I'm also very concerned about the environment and environmental justice. And like Adam, I felt that I wasn't really tuned in enough about the climate. And the more I learned, the more urgent I found that it was to take action. So I then took the legislative training that Climate Action California did, and I was really impressed. So I decided that because of the strength of advocating for policy, that I thought I would want to be part of that. So that's why I'm here. I want to make a difference, and I think this is an avenue to do that.
That's great. So could you give us some background on S 1137 and let us know what Climate Action California's plan is for the setbacks referendum?
Yes, let me first give you a little background on what SB 1137 does. It was passed in the 2022 session. It was authored by Lena Gonzalez, who Adam just mentioned before, and it prohibits new drilling permits for oil and gas operations that are within 3,200 feet of what they call sensitive receptors. And those are things like places like schools, houses, public buildings, where people may be affected by some of the emissions of the oil operations. And it also requires some other things, such as they need to develop a detection system to detect leaks, and also make a detailed plan for what happens if they do emit some noxious gases. So the argument for the bill was that 5.5 million Californians live within about a mile of oil operations, and of those, 92% of the people are of color, and those operations pose, health risks, which include asthma, preterm births, and cancer. And also, it's an environmental justice issue. So it was an important bill to get passed, and the bill was signed on September 16th of 2022 by Governor Newsom, and the very next Monday, the California Independent Petroleum Association filed for a referendum on the bill. And soon after that, they sent out paid canvassers to get signatures for the referendum. And they qualified for the ballot. It was announced on February 3rd by the Secretary of State. So that's going to be on the ballot in 2024. Now, I live in Ventura County, and we had a similar referendum on some county ordinances in the 2022 election. And those ordinances would require oil operators to abide by new regulations if they touched old, relatively unregulated wells. And the backers of the referendum had a very rigorous campaign to get the ordinances overturned. They called their campaign "Stop the Energy Shutdown." What were their talking points? They were saying that many jobs would be lost, tax revenues would drop because of a drop in oil production, there would be an increase in dependence on dirty foreign oil, and there would be a rise in your gas and oil prices. Their campaign went door to door with flyers. They aired many videos of ordinary people talking about how these ordinances would make them lose their jobs or increase their gas expenses. So I worked on the campaign to try to keep the ordinances in place, and I was just really frustrated that this Stop the Energy Shutdown campaign was using misinformation and appeals to one's emotions. The referendum won by only about 5% of the vote, but they spent $6 million compared to $1 million on the side of those trying to keep the ordinances in effect. So I want to get ahead of this referendum and make sure that it gets defeated. And so what I think we need to do is get ahead of the oil companies and inoculate the voters to this misinformation. So Climate California is going to reach out to other NGOs to pool our ideas and our resources to get information to voters that they will need to make an informed decision about this referendum. And that will include things like writing letters to the editor, posting on social media, and maybe we'll even make some videos and post it on social media. So if you know of anyone, yourself or any organization that you think may be interested in joining the campaign to support keeping SB 1137, please let me know. You can email me. I'll put my email in the chat. And back to you, John.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll move on to Catherine on the finance team. And Catherine, tell us a little bit about yourself.
There I am again. I wear many hats at CAC. I'm a volunteer coordinator, but I also lead our climate finance team. And for my day job, I work for a climate nonprofit that develops climate simulation models. So that's me.
Wow. Okay. It's more than full time. So the governor passed a major corporate climate accountability package last year, SB 253 and 261, that did not allocate funding for it. So what is the current state of play?
Yes, thank you for that question. And just for those who are not familiar, so SB 253 and 261 were a package of bills that require disclosure of greenhouse gas emissions and climate risks. And it's required of the largest companies operating in the state. And it doesn't sound like much, we're just requiring disclosure. But as Will was saying earlier, disclosure of emissions and other metrics is the very first step in enforcement and also target setting, and it sets in motion a very important process for a corporate organization. So as you said, the bills passed. We knew that Governor Newsom wasn't a huge fan of them, but he was sort of somewhat pressed into signing those bills, and it was good for his PR when he went to New York to announce it, but didn't allocate any funding in this year's budget. The state is in a budget deficit this year, and this unfortunately impacts on many of the bills that we'd like to see passed. So funding got cut for many programs, many climate programs as well. So our challenge right now is to continue pushing budget chairs. And we've written a letter, a very extensive letter to both budget committees, essentially urging them to allocate funding. It's really a drop in the ocean as far as the overall budget is concerned. Thankfully, one of the authors of two bills is actually the new chair of the Senate Budget Committee, and he's very committed to allocating funding. We're also, unfortunately, facing this other unhelpful headwind in terms of the Western Petroleum Association and a few other organizations that have sued the implementation agency, which again, California Air Resources Board, which you've heard mentioned several times today. So we're having to kind of keep that in mind as well. But so we'll continue pushing for this funding. The budget has to be approved by June 15th, and then there may well be more letters that we need to send to Governor himself later in the year. So look out for further communications on this point.
Right, okay, fingers crossed. Do you have time to tell us a little bit more about what's on the agenda for your team this year?
Sure, very, very quickly, because I'm conscious of time. So we are very excited about one particular bill, which is SB 1497 by Senator Menjivar. For those of you familiar with the concept of a super fund, it's sort of federal regulation administered by the EPA that forces parties responsible for contamination to either perform cleanups or reimburse the federal government for EPA-led cleanup work. Well, this bill will do something similar, but for greenhouse gas emissions. It'll impose the fee on fossil fuel companies, the largest of the polluters, and it'll then create a fund where 40% of the proceeds in that fund will be allocated to helping low-income communities that were most impacted by the impact of climate change. So very excited about this bill. We expect a significant amount of pushback from the industry. There's actually a hearing taking place next week. And yeah, we'll need all the support that you can give. Our governor has line item veto on bills, so it's the fight will continue until the very last minute. So that's all I want to say on this one.
Okay. All right, I guess we'll move on now to Steve on the Energy Committee. Steve, would you like to tell us about yourself?
Sure. Yeah, so my name's Steve Rosenblum. I'm the energy team lead, and I live in Palo Alto. My background is I have a PhD in nuclear chemistry, and I retired from a career in experimental laboratory physics, and later in industrial semiconductor physics equipment development in Silicon Valley. I retired in 2002, and since then I've gotten what I would consider a second advanced degree in climate change. Having a background in chemistry is really important for understanding the issues, because we're facing industries that have huge resources and can afford to pay for the best liars that money can buy to put out their sheets of information about solutions to the climate problem, when what they're trying to do is continue business as usual. So as you can tell from what you read in the papers, chemistry is the problem with climate change, and it's also the solution. Global warming is caused by burning carbon, and putting it in the atmosphere creates a greenhouse effect. And the solution is to stop burning carbon. And so we have to get our energy from other sources besides burning carbon. So in 2013, I started working with 350 Silicon Valley as a volunteer, and eventually got sucked into the orbit of Janet Cox on the Legislative Action Committee in 2019. And that was a real eye-opener for me, because it showed me where the action was in both the legislative process and the regulatory sphere. We haven't really talked about the regulatory agencies except for CARB, but there's a whole slew of them: Public Utilities Commission, Energy Commission, Natural Resources, Conservation, CalGEM. There's probably 100 of them that are all important for climate, and we need to be dealing with all of them. And so when Janet decided to found the Climate Action California in 2022, I was there. I was ready to throw my lot in with the group.
That's great. So there are many energy-related bills that are currently on the floor of the House. What are you focusing on?
Well, the two we're most interested in are SB 1866 by Senator Hart, which eliminates fees for idle wells and instead increases and speeds up the well plugging obligations on or before July 1st, 2025. So what would happen is that the operator of the well would have to have a plan immediately to start plugging the well, rather than what they're doing now is paying a fee, a slap on the wrist fee every year for keeping the well unplugged. And we all know there are 35,000 idle wells in California that are spewing all kinds of pollutants, including methane, but also toxic pollutants and contaminating groundwater, and they all need to be plugged. The other bill is a bill by Senator Skinner, SB 1073, which allows state agencies to enter into forward contracts for low carbon cement and concrete products. And this is important because concrete is the most used building material in the world, and it's a source. A huge amount of carbon dioxide is created in making limestone into quicklime, and then also in providing the heat to carry that process out. So there are ways of decarbonizing that process, and this bill is a way of catalyzing the industrial conversion, to say that the state will act as a buyer of this low carbon concrete.
How can volunteers help you?
We have in the legislature this year, we have over 50 bills that are in the energy team's bailiwick. As people have mentioned, energy it overlaps with building decarbonization, it overlaps with transportation, it overlaps with finance. It's basically where it's one of the nexuses of the climate problem. And we need people that are interested in working with regulatory agencies, writing bills or bill comments, and we'll train people. You know, we're not expecting people to come to us knowing all this stuff to start with. And I think people have started working with the group and just kind of listen to our meetings. We meet twice a month, and you know, we're happy to answer questions. You know, have people just take on small tasks to work with somebody, just learning, you know, a certain aspect. You know, there's all kinds of issues. There's energy distribution, you know, with how we get the electricity from one place to another. There's storage, there's hydrogen, there's issues about what's called renewable fuels, which are an industry fraud. We don't want to be involved in any combustion. So I just want to leave people with a couple of ideas. Anybody that tells you that burning stuff is a solution to climate is telling you a lie. And the other thing is that the solution to climate change is electrifying everything. And anybody that says anything different than that is lying. So the quicker we get those two things done, the faster we'll get past the tipping points that are threatening us now. So
Thank you so much.
if people are interested in volunteering, you can go to our website, and you know, Catherine is happy to, you know, you can choose what committees you want, and she'll be happy to direct you and let me know if you're interested in my committee, and I'll contact you and try to suck you in.
So, Steve, could you just say a couple words about hydrogen?
Well, it's hard to say a couple of words.
Well, make it 10.
I'll give you a couple of sentences. So about a year ago, we wrote a white paper or a briefing paper about hydrogen, because there's a lot of hype about it, about how it's a great solution for the climate. And it does have its uses, but to create hydrogen requires energy. It's not a fuel. It's not like sunlight or wind or coal or oil that you kind of pull out of the ground or get out of the air and you can make energy with it. You have to actually use energy to make it. Like the way it's made now is called steam methane reforming, where they take methane and subject it to high temperatures and water and a catalyst and break it down into carbon dioxide and hydrogen. And it takes a lot of energy to make that hydrogen. So, for example, to fuel a zero-emission vehicle with hydrogen takes twice as much electrical energy as it does with a battery. So you don't get hydrogen for free, so you need to use it judiciously. And if you want to know more, ask us for the white paper and we'll be able to send it to you. It's easy reading, it's only 2 pages. But
Do you have a link to it? Is there a link to that paper?
Yeah, I'll put it in chat.
We'll add that to the information.
I'm not sure I understand.
Okay. Is that it, Janet?
Well,
All right.
yeah. I think that's our panel. Now, this is interesting because it's possible that you've all listened to this breathtaking expertise and you feel intimidated or like these are people who know so much that you can hardly talk to them. But actually, we're not like that. There are a number of people, I mean, a large number of people, and some of them are on this call, who read our wonky email traffic and hang out in our meetings and just kind of soak it up and are really engaged in learning from what we're talking about. And we're nice enough people so that I don't think we're that off-putting. But the interesting thing is that those people stick. We're really here to help everybody figure out what the deal is and what they can do about it. And we're tremendously fortunate to have all of this volunteer expertise. And you've just had a little taste of it. But there really is something for everybody to do for the climate. In addition to the teams that have been reporting on this panel, we have folks who are working on plastics and toxics. We have an offshore wind team that is really digging into the policy and the financial developments as we're trying to get offshore wind going off the California coast. We have a really great building decarbonization team that is working on all kinds of electrification issues and trying to make it possible for more people to charge their electric cars at home. There's really, and we do as much as we have volunteers to support. If there's an interesting issue that comes along and we don't have people who are willing to work on it, that's fine. We got plenty of other stuff to do, but our capacity is really determined by the number of volunteers and the amount of time we have. And whether it's just our wonderful personality or the time that we're in, there are lots of people who are showing up to work on climate and work with us. And the folks on this call who are the volunteers and the donors who are doing the work and making this possible, I can't tell you how grateful we are. It's just a gift to have you with us. And we hope you'll stick. We hope you'll keep giving money. And actually, a lot of volunteers are donors and a lot of donors are volunteers because we're all just trying to do everything we can. And bring your friends and read the Substack magazine. We'll also send a link to that, but it's awesome. And if you subscribe, you'll make Alex feel really good about himself, but he should feel good about himself anyway, because it's dynamite. But I think that's about it from me. Now, we do want to take questions and we have some time. So if you have like to ask questions, please do.
So there were a couple questions in the chat. I think Will might have answered one already. But then someone else asked about the remote hearing petition.
Sally has her hand up. Sally.
Oh,
hi. I saw an email in which you were talking about Assemblymember Bryan and a meeting that happened in Sacramento, and that was really powerful. I wonder if that's appropriate to share here.
Yeah, if there's time, I can run we can run the video. It's some background. Assemblymember Isaac Bryan, and Sally lives in his district, and so does Joan and a few other people, has constitutional amendment bill, ACA 16, that had its first hearing last week. It's a very simple amendment. It says that the people of California have the right to clean air, clean water, and a healthy environment. Full stop. It's awesome. And it's got the oil companies and the Chamber of Commerce and the usual suspects just completely freaked. And there was a press conference earlier in the day that was pretty interesting. But at the end of the presentation, in the committee hearing, Isaac Bryan came back and it was the most awesome. I was almost in tears. Everybody clapped. It was just the most wonderful human statement of why we're all here and what we're trying to do. So if there's time, we can pull it up and play it, but it was really just crazy. Selden.
Oh, hi. I was just wondering if you could tell me a little bit of what the plastics team is up to. What are they working on?
Is Ashley here?
Is Ashley here? I'm not sure she is.
Oh, maybe Catherine can tell you.
Yeah, sure. There's a couple of there's one PFAS bill, a bill that's so we already have a ban on PFAS in cosmetics and in food packaging. So that bill would extend the scope to all packaging. So that's an exciting one. The other one would put a ban on single-use water bottles and other sort of beverage containers on statewide property. So this would capture prisons and some educational institutions and possibly certain airports. So that's an exciting one. But yeah, those are probably the biggest ones that come to mind.
So Senator Ben Allen, who carried SB 54, which was the really groundbreaking plastics bill that passed a couple of years ago, has continued. And one of the things about SB 54 was that it was really trying to set up extended producer responsibility for plastics manufacturers. It was a miracle that they got that bill passed, but he's still on it. And he's got a bill that's going to be heard next week that is also talking about EPR for some plastics. It's SB 1231, Plastic Pollution Prevention and Packaging Producer Responsibility. And that's going to be heard on Wednesday in the Senate Environmental Quality Committee, which he chairs, and I'll be there and you should too. Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions people would like to ask? You know, one thing I think is worth saying about our project to try to get CARB to regulate agricultural methane, the strategy that we're taking, in addition to dropping this fabulous petition on the poor agency, is meeting with board members to try to get a sort of a critical mass of CARB board members kind of feeling brave enough to beard staff in their lair. It's a difficult situation because of the Brown Act, the board members can't really talk to each other very much outside of a meeting. And it seems like they're all sort of intimidated by staff, which may be part of the plan. But by speaking with a series of board members and telling them that all, you know, we're not going to tell you who we're talking about because that would break the law, but we're here to tell you that there are other board members who agree that we really need to get a handle on agricultural methane. So you might want to go to, you know, talk to this management about this, and I think it might work. I mean, it's a really, we just have to hit this methane issue from every possible direction. And I think that this carb strategy that Will and Dan have put together is really brilliant.
So Rebecca had asked about the remote hearing petition. I don't know if you want to talk about, I don't know if Kathy's here, or Sally, do you want to talk about that?
About what?
The
About
remote hearing.
Oh. Oops.
Or maybe Janet, you're more up to date. I don't know.
So during the pandemic, the legislature opened the phone lines. I mean, nobody was in the building. And so for the first time, we were able to participate in hearings in Sacramento remotely, which was wonderful, especially for people who live either very far away in miles, like in Southern California, or very far away in traffic, like San Jose. And at the beginning of this session, and also for the assembly last year, they declared that with the end of the pandemic, that they don't need to entertain remote participation any longer. And this was terrible for a lot of small grassroots groups all over the state that certainly can't afford lobbyists, and also can't just drop everything and go to Sacramento, of all out of the way, godforsaken places, pardon my French. So we put a petition together, and we have a couple thousand humans signing it, and we're probably up to 65 or 70 organizations that have signed the petition asking the leadership to restore remote participation. And Sally has been working on that with us, and Kathy Schaefer from Climate Reality Project also. And it turns out to be a heavier lift than we thought. But we're not going to let up until they change the
petition already went in, right? The petition went in already.
Oh, yeah. Yes, we sent the petition to the Speaker of the Assembly, the President Pro Tem of the Senate, and the budget chairs and the budget subcommittee chairs in both houses. And we've been met with resounding silence from everyone except Isaac, who apparently has been trying to lobby Speaker Rivas. But it's a heavy lift. There were a couple of very dramatic hearings last year where like 600 people would show up to do a Me Too, and the hearing went on for hours, and the legislators were demoralized, but it's kind of their job. So we're going to stay on it, but thanks for asking. Steve has a question.
No, I didn't have a question. I just wanted to add on to your comment, exactly what you said at the end. One of the legislators we spoke to said exactly that they felt it was gumming up the works, having all these people come and talk and say what they thought about these bills. And what happens now is that the lobbyists are always there. And so the people with the money get to talk, and the people without the money don't.
Yeah. So as usual, we're just fighting for the little guy.
All right.
Okay.
Might be it. Catherine, do you see anything else?
No, I do not. And I'd probably like to move on to our closing remarks, if that's okay. I actually have one more quote to leave you with for today. Last quote for the day. The perception of power is power. This is what Senator Josh Becker told us. He was our friend and our climate champion. And this was in the context of our endorsement process. he was encouraging us to press ahead with our endorsements, fundraise. And that's because these endorsements give us a platform and the visibility to hold policymakers to account once they get elected. And on that note, I'd like to go back to Adam Sweeney, who's the head of our elections team. He would like to say a few words. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to move the slides. For some reason, they're not cooperating. There you go. Over to you, Adam. Thank you.
Right, there I am again. So most of all, I really just want to thank all of you, our donors, our volunteers, as Janet mentioned, our donor volunteers. It's all of you that make this organization what it is, and it's your work that is really pushing things forward and pushing our politicians to do the right thing. What I love about this group, there's several things, but I really love how we're bringing together some of the most active grassroots leaders from organizations around the state. All the climate reality policy leaders show up here, and 350 leaders show up here. All the people you see every time. It's pretty amazing, and it's giving us a platform to work together with the people who really want to push on this stuff and really want to make things happen. I'm also amazed by the credibility with legislators that all of you have built over the last several years. As was mentioned, you get meetings with people. They ignore you. We get there and they come to us asking for our actual opinion on the things that they're doing. That credibility is getting us to the table, right? And getting us into the conversations that really matter. And that's only going to grow as we grow our political credibility along with our policy credibility. So I hope that all of you can see that in all the great stuff that we presented tonight. And finally, I hope that all of you join me in continuing to dedicate your time and your money to making all of this work. It takes both, of course. It's politics. That's life. For me, the best part of this is doing it with all of you. There's just nothing better than working with nice, competent, diligent people. And I think we have a great group of folks with those properties here in Climate Action California. So thank you. I'll see you all again soon. And I think we get one last word from Janet before we go.
Well, how could I beat that? Does anybody want to listen to Isaac Bryan? Because it's only about 3 minutes. And I would be happy to have him close. And I'll just thank all of you for coming and ask you to stick with us and sign up and send money. But if you want to hear Isaac Bryan, we can do that too. It's really awesome. Should we run it for anybody who wants to stay for an extra 3 minutes?
Absolutely, yes.
Sure, let's do that.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. It starts at 3 hours and 43 minutes into this hearing. This was the payoff. Oh, and just pause it for 1 second, just to say that these guys had actually, he's responding to the criticisms of this idea that he had been given. And it was like, everybody's going to sue us every minute, and we'll never, NIMBYs will come out of the woodwork and we'll never be able to build housing again in California. That's the setup. So here he goes.
Would hope you'd give some consideration to that. If there's some way to just kind of, I don't want to say narrow it, but just describe a little bit more of what that means. And I'd be interested when you close, or you let me know now what you mean by that. That'd be great. But thanks again for bringing this. And you didn't bring very many support witnesses either, just half the room stood up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Patterson. Any other questions from the committee? We'll go for the chair first close. Seeing none, Mr. Chair, would you like to close?
Actually, just happy to be added as a co-author.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Chair, would you like to close?
Yes, Mr. Chair, and Mr. Patterson, easily 3/4 of the room. First, I'd just like to reject the idea that enshrining the right to clean air and water and a healthy environment is anti-housing and the bidding of the white elite NIMBYs as the poor black renter from South Central with a coalition of black, brown, poor, and indigenous community-based organizations who have lived in sacrifice zones for decades. That's just wildly offensive. I think there's unintended consequences of everything that we do. I think enshrining the right to reproductive freedom in California was bold and brave and could have unintended consequences, especially if the federal government is to change hands again. I think that's part of why we lead in California, because we know what the counterfactual is of not doing it. We know what it means to not push forward. We know what it means to nibble around the edges and never actually make a meaningful difference in the lives of anybody. That's not what folks sent us here to do. Folks sent us here to fight for the values that so many of us hold across California, across all of our districts. And when necessary, codifying those values in statute, like the right to drinking water, and even going further and enshrining those as fundamental rights of citizenship in California, which we have done time and again. The right to reproductive freedom, the right to sanctuary, the right to so many things that are unique to California, because in California we lead, and because we know that as we continue to blaze forward, there are others who might try to undo our state sovereignty at the federal government. We've seen that, and that's where this right in Pennsylvania was most effective. We learned from Montana, we learned from Pennsylvania, we learned from the many others with green amendments in their state constitution, as did New York, who passed this exact same language, the only state with this exact same language, and did it 3 years ago with over 70% of the people of New York in very strong support. And even if it does lead to potential litigation for the state infringing on your right to clean air, clean water, or a healthy environment, that's the kind of accountability the people of California should have over their government. If your government is going to infringe on your ability to breathe and have clean water and a healthy environment, you should have a voice in that process. But that's not the goal of this constitutional amendment. To your point, that's our job to put in those regulations. That's our job to create those frameworks. That's our job to decide when they apply and when they don't. What this measure does is remind us that the people of California, the 40 million people in our state, should have a right to clean air, water, and a healthy environment, and that should be the framework by which we create those regulations, by which we think about the impact of the policy decisions we make in this building. And with that, I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.